Welcome to another episode of AI Unpacked. I'm your host for the show, James Kogan, joined as usual by my co-host, Malcolm Peralty. Malcolm, welcome back, my friend.
Hello again.
So today we have an awesome show for you. We are diving into the topic of AI and transportation. Now, there are billions of people that move around this world every single day, and there are billions of dollars worth of goods that are constantly in motion. Artificial intelligence may very well be the single biggest disruptor to absolutely everything that moves on this planet every single day. Now, if you would have asked me 15 years ago, what were the chances that today we would all be in self-driving autonomous vehicles, I would have said, I think the chances are pretty good. But it feels like this self-driving autonomous future has been slow to arrive at its destination. Malcolm, would you agree? And if so, why are we delayed?
I wouldn't have said that we were delayed until Elon Musk and Tesla were just all about it. It was so confident, next year we're going to get there. And then it was next year we're going to get there. And then it was next year we're going to get there. And here we are in 2023 and we're still not really truly there. But it's not so bad. My car now has the lane keep assist and the automatic cruise control and all kinds of wonderful features. So even if full AI driving and it doesn't happen anytime soon, it's little bits and pieces of it are making its way down the pipe, and it's a pretty good life. I mean, I'm not complaining in any way, shape, or form. And I think, this is one of those topics where I haven't been inundated with 50 million things that are happening in AI and transportation, and I thought that would make it an extra interesting topic for us to kind of cover today.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, would you agree that it hasn't fully arrived yet and that it's not where we thought it would be? I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is that it feels like it's taken longer.
Yeah, I would say highway driving in situations where it's low risk or low complexity, I think we're probably there at this point. And in situations like city driving or in high traffic areas, I would say that we're probably still far away. And I think part of that, though, really has to do with the cost metric more than anything else. The sensors that were on Tesla's earlier vehicles, they're using full vision systems now rather than radar or other systems to kind of feed data into their autonomous driving. And I don't want to call it AI driving because that's not truly what it is yet. But their autonomous driving systems had all of this additional detail and information that computers could process and understand in really impactful and powerful ways. And then they kind of gutted that due to cost and said, now you have to use eyeballs or cameras like a real human. And now we kind of have a little bit of a belly flop, in my opinion, on kind of where we are on that. I don't know if your opinion differs.
Well, I think that, I guess there's a lot of factors that go into what makes a self-driving autonomous vehicle both safe to use and also something that regulators can wrap their heads around and say, okay, this is okay to be on our roads. And it feels like this whole ball of regulation as well, the technology feels like it's pretty much there. Whether it's the machine learning, the sensor fusion, using different cameras and LiDAR and things of that nature, it feels like, I mean, there's been pilot projects in San Francisco with Waymo and all this stuff. It feels like it's there, but at the same time, we're still dealing with the reality of risk. What happens when something goes wrong, and is the world really prepared to deal with that? I know last week alone, there was a landmark case where Tesla was sued in court because somebody had activated the autopilot system in their Tesla, driving around city streets. And it ended up swerving into a lamppost, and the airbag went off and caused facial damage and teeth loss and various other things. And Tesla was sued. And in the end, the court ruled last week that Tesla was not responsible, that the airbag worked as intended. Tesla has been adamant that you shouldn't be activating their autopilot in city streets. It's for highway driving. So that was kind of driver error there. But at the end of the day, Tesla was not responsible, and there was no damages awarded to the plaintiff in this particular case. But it feels like there's going to need to be more of these precedent-setting cases that go through the system in order for the groundwork to really be laid to say, okay, we need to have these vehicles on the road. They're okay to be on the road, and we can handle the risk that goes along with that. And I was also thinking that if you look at all the aircraft that are in the air above North America at any given moment, it looks like this big metallic chaotic mess, right? Like, why aren't they colliding all the time, right? Well, they're not colliding all the time because they are all hooked in to a system, and through algorithms and, very, very complex systems, every airplane is known where it is at any given time. And it feels like with self-driving autonomous vehicles, we're asking these vehicles to go into a mixed reality where, like, I was thinking, like, if you put let's say a dark aircraft into the sky, like a dark 737 that was not connected to the network, flown rogue by a human being going wherever it wanted to go, wouldn't last very long before a collision happened, right? So if we could flick a switch tomorrow and say every single vehicle on the road would be autonomous, self-driving, connected to a network, it feels like the technology would be there where it would be able to manage the load. It would be able to manage, knowing where everything needs to go and what trajectories everything needs to be on. But we're asking these self-driving autonomous vehicles to go into a world that's still quite random, with humans driving these dark vehicles, not connected to a network, and can move wherever it wants to move. And that, to me, is the conundrum. This is the difficulty, is for a period of time, and probably for a long period of time, we're going to be living in this mixed world where there are humans driving vehicles and there'll be computers driving vehicles. And it feels like we're struggling with that.
Honestly, I think that's actually not the big problem. I think you came across the solution, but I don't think the idea of having vehicles driven by humans and vehicles driven by autonomous systems is really the crux of the problem. The crux of the problem is the lack of data sharing, right? I think an AI system could compensate for human drivers if it knew what it was dealing with was a human driver, right? So there's an opportunity there in terms of that data sharing and understanding, in terms of how an AI system could, flow and work together, and then all of those advantages and all those opportunities for, better traffic flow, better safety, all of those things could start pushing people towards like AI only vehicles because they have a better safety deal on their side. But right now, I think the data sharing is really the most impactful and important part that could kind of happen, and the most valuable in terms of these, learning models that we're setting up. Analyzing this data and understanding how it kind of works with these different systems, I think could be super transformational. And it's really kind of unfortunate that that's not the direction that we're heading in, that we continue to kind of treat all of these millions of vehicles as these separate little widgets on these conveyor belts rather than having them kind of communicate with each other. And I don't know about you, but there's been a million different times where I've wished that I could send a message to a car nearby to let them know even something simple as like your headlight is out or why you're driving like that. And so it's kind of a shame that we don't have more interconnectedness between vehicles.
Yeah, and I guess there's different manufacturers, there are proprietary systems. There's a lot of everything's not open source, right? So and that's kind of what you're getting at.
But we're seeing even in like the household automation system, Google and others have all come together to create a singular standard that they can all join now. So if they can all do it, why can't auto manufacturers do it? And we talk about the internet being kind of like that largest interconnected system with, we don't say, oh, Apple has to be on their own network and Windows computers are on their own network. We found those interoperabilities. So I don't see that as like a technical hurdle. Even something as simple as adding Zigbee to all of the different cars and allowing them to transmit and receive data about, last servicing or like, engine warnings or tire pressure. I mean, that could start being valuable data to other drivers, both autonomous and not.
Mm-hmm. So I guess this is going to happen at some point. And it does seem like eventually we're going to move away from cars being about driving experience and being more about how much computing power it has and what kind of a software experience it has. That's a transition that's in the process of happening, right? I mean, when you see commercials or ads for cars, you still see it being about the driving experience. So we're not there yet. But eventually, this is going to go the way of software, and it's going to go the way of computing power, and that's how we're going to look at vehicles, correct?
Sure, but like how long have you, like on average, how long do you own a vehicle for? My wife and I, we drove our
Yeah.
last one for over 7.5, 8 years before we decided to pass it on to my niece and get a new
Hmm.
vehicle for ourselves. So I think about the pace of change in technology and I think about vehicles, and there's a disconnection there, in my opinion, on how we kind of handle the fact that our technology is outpacing the expected life of a vehicle. So what do we do to
Uh-huh.
kind of deal with that?
Interesting. I guess that brings up the other point of vehicle ownership, because at the end of the day, are we going to be owning vehicles? Is that going to be a thing anymore? Are we eventually going to all be part of a subscription program? I mean, if you think about it, just even looking at, I know it's a very loose analogy, but the music industry, we used to buy music by the album, and then we bought music by the track, and then eventually we just didn't buy music individually. Now we just subscribe to a stream all service, right? It feels
Yep.
like car ownership might go the same way, where we're not actually going to own vehicles anymore. We're just going to subscribe to a particular network. And depending on what those networks' features are, that will determine on what the subscription fee will be. So if you want a luxurious network filled with Mercedes that are there within 5 minutes on demand, you'll pay a fee to be part of that service. If you want more of an economical service that'll be there within 30 minutes on demand, you'll pay a lesser fee. Do you see that this is the way that this is going to go?
I expect that it will be. I laugh always when I read the thing, you will own nothing and you will be happy about it. The idea that we will rent everything, pay a subscription service for everything is really just the direction that we're heading in general as a society in terms of that like capitalist transition. I know that Tesla for a long time has really wanted to have like a subscription system where no one owned their vehicles, or they could add it to a pool of vehicles that would go and be a taxi during the day while you're sitting in your office. And there's some appeal to that for sure, especially if it can help you pay for vehicles, which are becoming much, much more expensive as we integrate more and more technology into them. So I can certainly see that happening. I don't know that I would necessarily want to order a car and see that someone, threw up in it from the party the night before. I think I'd be kind of bummed to receive that car. And I think that's an issue that we as a society still haven't figured out in terms of that user experience, right? Or you get in the vehicle and the battery's empty, or it has another issue that stops you from being able to complete your journey. And how much slack do we have in this industry that can kind of cover for those issues? I don't know. Would you ever want to be subscribed to a car service? They already exist, so to speak. There are car sharing services. They just don't have that autonomous piece. And you live in a big
Correct.
city, so yeah.
I think that once we get to the point where there are some guarantees on demand, like in other words, if a subscription service could say that within 10 to 15 minutes your vehicle will be where you need it to be, I absolutely would be prepared to give up car ownership. I don't feel the need to own a vehicle as long as I can get from A to B and have it be reliable and have some degree of expectation of quality in terms of what the experience would be like to be in that vehicle. Then yeah, I understand Uber is skirting on the edge of that in the sense that you will be picked up and you can see what the timing is and etc. But obviously it's driven by humans and the vehicles will vary and the reliability sometimes can vary, etc., etc. So I think once we go fully autonomous and there's some real consistency in the quality of that network, I could definitely see myself giving up owning a vehicle. Yeah.
Do you think you'll have a choice?
That's a very good question. I don't know. You're right. I'm not sure if we reach a tipping point where you won't have a choice. And so here's the crux of it all to some degree is once you go the way of networked vehicles and relinquishing car ownership, it brings up a lot of benefits for urban planning, right? So
Yep.
now all of a sudden, if you think about all of the parking spaces that exist inside cities, right, for vehicles that are driven by humans, well, now all of a sudden you're taking all that space and you're basically putting it outside city limits. Because now these network vehicles, when they're not working, can leave city limits and go park and be maintained, et cetera, somewhere else, and then come back into the city and then just do their work shift until they exit the city to park overnight or wherever and get maintained. So it changes how cities are actually structured if we don't need all of the parking spaces anymore. It's and environmentally, of course, you're if everything is electrified, then we do away with the combustion engine, which feels like the autonomous future just feels like it's going to be electrified. I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't. So again, I think once you sort of reach a tipping point, I could definitely see where it may not be an option if you want to actually be in a vehicle inside a certain boundary of an urban environment, especially a dense urban environment. It may be that you won't be allowed to drive a vehicle in that environment. I could see that happening.
It's funny how we resist getting rid of our vehicles, right? Like, public transportation exists, buses, light rail, streetcars, subways, like all of these options exist and could also be, integrated into an AI system to optimize their flow and their capacity and reduce their costs. So it's funny that we keep talking about having kind of like that personal vehicle experience when, again, is it really necessary? Is it really needed? If you could have these on-demand, autonomous vehicles, does it matter? Like, does car ownership matter anymore? Does why not make it somewhat based around kind of mass transit in a way? As long as it was inexpensive, efficient, got you where you wanted to go without taking too much time. If it meets 90% of your needs, is that kind of maybe where a lot of it will go? Like, will these subscription services for individual vehicles kind of quickly become only for the wealthy? Just as we've kind of seen, electric vehicles at first were very much for the wealthy and they've kind of come down in price, but not as much as I think a lot of us had hoped or expected in terms of how long they've been around, especially, from the first Tesla Roadster to today. I don't know. I would like to think that personal vehicles will still exist in some way, shape, or form, but I just, you talk about this transition of how we design cities, and I constantly think about the fact that there's this wonderful picture that shows, how many people could fit in a car maximum and how much space that takes up on a road. And then they change that to how many people could fit on that same road if they were on buses, and then how many people could fit on that same road if they were on even just like bicycles, like electric bicycles. And, those numbers are just, the scale is just massively different. And so, do we have to kind of, when we get used to not having our own personal vehicle, that freedom expectation that we've kind of gotten accustomed to over the last 100 years, if that goes away, then do we give up on that, self-owned or that even like that personal subscription option and kind of get used to hopefully better public transportation?
You're right. I think that's probably a transition that's going to eventually happen. And I think that that's a generational shift. So
yeah.
It's the younger generation that will be less inclined to own things. You can already see it. I can see it in the younger generation. They're more willing to not necessarily be the owner and be more of a subscription or rent or just like, I don't know. It does feel a little bit more old world to be focused on ownership. To me, it feels more new paradigm to not really care so much about ownership and live more minimalist and things of that nature. Would you agree?
See, and here's another issue with how we've designed our society. We're assuming that there's these choices and these decisions being made, and I'm not necessarily seeing that happen. I would say part of the reason why we've gone from purchasing albums to subscribing to services is the perceived value versus cost. A CD near kind of the end of its major run was becoming quite expensive. And so switching to a single song model meant that you could kind of get the best tracks without having to pay that full price. There was this opportunity or this feeling of value and savings. And I think we're seeing that throughout all markets in terms of kind of this ownership versus kind of rental model. People aren't buying houses anymore, not because they don't want houses of their own. It's because they can't afford them. The average house price has gone up too much that they can't save a down payment to make that transition. And I think if you look at the average price of a personal vehicle today, if you look at the average price of an SUV today, for example, you're going to see that that has risen by a lot. And the industry has actually gotten rid of producing kind of the lower cost vehicles and are all moving up market in terms of pricing. And so that will drive that transition away from ownership, just as it has with all these other things.
Sure. Yeah, cost is going to be a huge factor. Absolutely. Now, where AI is being utilized maybe the most when it comes to transportation is in things like traffic management, for example. Yeah. Cities are using AI in very, very deep ways. in order to manage traffic management. And in fact, two cities in the world that are kind of held up as leaders in this is Toronto being one of them, and Barcelona being another. These are two cities that are both using AI in like very much world-class ways, and they're doing it in similar ways and also in different ways. So, for example, in Toronto, they have what's called this Vision Zero initiative, where they're using AI to manage traffic signals. They're using AI to monitor traffic congestion and enforcement areas, all with the idea to basically reduce fatalities down to zero or near zero, hence the Vision Zero initiative. And Barcelona is using AI to create super blocks, and they're focused more on pedestrians and cyclists, and they're using deep learning and AI to create the safest zones for pedestrians and cyclists. So it's interesting how here in Canada, Toronto is held up as a leader. They have one of the biggest AI traffic centers in the world, actually, in Toronto. So it's happening here. It's happening everywhere. Cities are using AI for traffic management. And that seems like a really, obvious way that AI can be used to manage large data sets in order to make the road safer and pedestrians and cyclists safer. So that's happening.
Yeah, I just wish it had happened sooner in some ways. I don't know if you've driven through Toronto on the 401 recently, but it's brutal.
Yeah.
So whatever traffic things that they're doing with AI is not necessarily reducing my commute time to visit my wife's family. But I would expect that, again, if we have that interconnectedness between vehicles and these traffic management systems, I don't know if you've ever seen, there was this video that was showing like vehicles without need for traffic signals going through intersections. And I can only imagine how much more volume that the average city could handle in those kinds of situations. And using AI to kind of monitor the best routes and kind of direct vehicles through those, or deal with interesting situations that come up if a water main breaks, or there's an accident, or there's another issue that requires rerouting, to kind of help manage that information flow in a valuable way could be super useful in terms of helping people not sit in traffic all day. And it kind of goes back to the fact that we're transitioning away from gasoline vehicles, but they still exist. And so anything that we can do to reduce the amount of vehicles just sitting idle on the road, it's a super win for the world ecology. So,
yeah, for sure. And obviously a part of that also is rail, right? So
yeah.
Cities are, I think, more and more starting to use rail in public transit in order to get cars off the road, get people using transportation in a way that's more environmentally friendly. So what can you talk a little bit about in terms of AI and how AI is being used for rail systems?
Yeah, so it looks like it's happening pretty much everywhere. Driverless trains in Ontario. We have Israel buying a Rail Vision AI system. Mostly, so in terms of like transporting goods, they're using it to kind of detect if there's anything on the tracks that they need to be aware of, to kind of manage where trains are going, how fast they're going, stop them before they hit an issue. You see all those ridiculous like fail videos of a cargo train hitting a vehicle. Those kinds of things will kind of be relics or archives of the past, which I'm very much looking forward to. And the idea that, even more high speed, like bullet train systems could use AI systems to be able to kind of determine, the best opportunities for speed in terms of cost for energy versus the amount of people that they have. Is there an opportunity if we wait an extra 30 seconds, what will our fill rate of our public transportation be versus if we leave exactly on time? That kind of data can really adjust how useful and what capacity we have these trains running at. And I think, too, it could help with kind of service and support. I mean, you live in Ottawa. I'm sure you've heard about all the craziness that's happening with the O-train system there. A lot of that stuff, like, had they had the AA tools that we're starting to have now, could they have maybe potentially resolved some of those issues ahead of time in terms of, like, AI modeling of the situations that they're dealing with, or in terms of mechanical support or information about what's happening with these trains instead of waiting for them to, pretty much come off the tracks.
Yeah, so you're talking about like predictive maintenance and things of that nature. Yeah, for
Correct,
sure.
yeah.
Well, certainly two countries that are, I think, leaders in this area are Japan and China. I mean, Japan's been producing high-speed rail. Their maglev technology, of course, very well known, speeds of like 600 kilometers per hour. And China's been expanding its rail system immensely also. And both of those countries are using AI for things like, traffic management, train control, predictive maintenance, like you mentioned. Also, of course, there's also facial recognition and security, right? AI is deeply involved in that as well. So you're right, it's happening everywhere. And I think rails are just, it feels like it's a natural extension because, again, there's less human involvement with rail, and it's more predictable in terms of
Yep.
where they need to go. It just seems like it's right in the strike zone for AI, and it's being used in significant ways. And to your point, yeah, Ottawa could use more AI, I think, with its rollout with its LRT system. But yeah, rail definitely is an area that is steeped in AI at this point, and we're going to see more and more of it for sure.
Which is funny because in the States, we've had a lot of those derailings that have been all over the news. And a lot of those have been due to, poor maintenance, poor inspections, overworked rail workers. And like these are the problems that AI was really designed to solve. And I really hope that we see much more investments in, large first world countries, especially that are taking advantage of these rail systems for cargo, for passenger, for what have you. This is a huge opportunity for them to find a way to create a better service, a safer service, without necessarily adding on a crazy amount of cost. And I hope it happens.
Agreed, for sure. Now, one thing that hasn't really happened is we don't really have self-flying autonomous passenger planes right now. We're not there. That doesn't mean that it isn't being worked on. It is. Airbus is very much working on autonomous taxi, takeoff and landing technology. They've even tested, I believe, an Airbus A350, and they were successfully taxied, takeoff, and landed fully autonomously in a bunch of different conditions. So it's coming. The question I have is, what's it going to take for people to feel comfortable getting on an airplane that has no human in the cockpit? How do you think we make that transition? Because it is coming. Like I do think, humans not flying passenger planes is going to come eventually. What's gonna get people to do it?
It's so funny. I would love to have an answer for you, but I keep thinking I don't know that I would ever feel comfortable. And I feel like I have a pretty good sense of how, one, this technology works, and two, the fact that in terms of like, large passenger aircrafts, they're already super automated. There are systems that autopilot most of the route once in air. There are systems that can do auto landings. There are systems that can do auto takeoffs. And with the automated air traffic control systems that you were talking about before, it's pretty much already able to be end-to-end completely automated. But I personally think it might be another generational thing. I don't know that I would personally ever want to be on a plane that I knew for certain wasn't being piloted by a person, or at least being supported by a person. Mm-hmm. So you see those videos of like those air taxis in Dubai that are completely pilotless and autonomous and can, do the whole air taxi thing by themselves. I don't know that you would ever catch me on that unless I knew that there was kind of a human at a screen, with a joystick ready to take over if that machine kind of, thought that bird was a jet coming at it or something. I don't know. Could you ever see yourself or your family getting in one of those?
I think the answer for me is probably it will come down to cost. So, for example, if, let's say, an airline adopts this technology and is confident that it will get from A to B, no matter the conditions, safely, then I think what ends up happening is they discount that flight significantly in order to get people on it. There's a price point for everything, right? Like you're saying, no, I wouldn't do it. But if you could fly to Hawaii for $100 on a flight that had no pilot, right? And you were able to read, oh, okay, yeah, I did that flight like a bunch of times, no problem. It would be really tempting, right? So there's a price point for everything. And so I think what would end up happening is, in order to get the adoption, the price would come down significantly, where people would feel like, I'll risk it. Like, okay, it's low enough that like, sure, I'll take my chances. And then the comfort level builds and it builds and it builds without accidents, etc. And then eventually people just get more and more comfortable with the idea that, oh yeah, I took a flight the other week, without a pilot and it was fine and whatever. And then eventually the prices start coming up and up and up, and then eventually there are no pilots in the cockpit. To me, that's how it ends up happening, I think. And I think like I said, I think there is a level that people are prepared to just throw risk and say, okay, I'll take that chance.
Yeah, I think a lot of the comfort will probably come from cargo first. There's already the Air Force in the States has C-130J cargo planes hooked up to an AI system to be able to fly around. We're seeing other like autopilot systems managing cargo planes. I think that's where we're going to see a lot of development first, because you're not risking that many human lives comparatively, and we can kind of make sure and test the waters and have that like safety certificate that this is the technology that can do this. I also think, or I'd be super interested in your opinion about, flight, AI, and now combat, right? We've seen the US Air Force is using AI systems to fly F-16s for up to like 17 hours on their own. Mm-hmm. We know that AI technology is being integrated into combat related drones.
For sure.
And are we kind of at the precipice of that, like, a Terminator future of, like, oh no, what have we done?
Yeah, I think the military is there. I think they are way ahead of that game. And I think that we have seen, like you've mentioned, humanless piloted drones and aircraft that are, being used in combat in order to keep humans away from harm, I think is happening. It's happening all around the world in all the big militaries. So I feel like we're living in that future. I think the biggest issue you bring up with things of that nature is ethical dilemmas. When you're taking out things on the ground and maybe algorithms or computers are making some of those decisions, not just humans. I think there's a lot of ethical dilemmas with that, but I think the military is way ahead of this, and I think they're very much in an autonomous future at this point.
Which is just wild to think about. I think the ethical consideration, as we kind of mentioned at the top of the episode, is really, from top to bottom, any kind of AI-related transportation, any mistake that it makes is going to bring up that ethical concern of, like, should we have automated this? Should we have hooked an AI system into this? And I'd be curious your thoughts on where that tips over to being like just the cost of doing business versus, a larger question that society should be kind of pushing companies on.
Yeah, I think it comes down to data. At the end of the day, humans controlling things have problems. We're not risk-free. We're not perfect either, right? Humans make mistakes all the time that cause accidents, that cause deaths. So I think the data ultimately determines what the tipping point is. At some point, if the algorithms and the autonomous systems can fly better, drive better than humans can, and the data would support that over large data sets, then I think at some point you just say, okay, it's not going to be perfection. It's not that an accident won't happen. It's just that it's going to happen a lot less when it's in the hands of these systems that are more intelligent, that are smarter, able to handle much larger bits of data than humans can. And so I think that'll be the tipping point, is I think when the data really supports that sort of next step to say, okay, well, we're going to dive into this autonomous future, and we'll deal with the occasional mishap when it happens, because it will be occasional as opposed to a higher rate when it's humans involved.
I guess in the end, it's really more of a marketing issue than a truth and reality kind of issue, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing too is, you bring up things like smaller craft. There's a company in China called Ehang, I think it's called. They're operating 2-person passenger taxis. They kind of look like drones, right? And it makes sense if you think about like how drones are structured. There's no reason why you couldn't have a capsule and have these like, copter kind of things that transport a couple people. And there's a company in China that's doing this, and they're working with regulations. They're working with the Chinese government, and they've successfully like carried people to and from places. And how tempting would it be if you wanted to go, let's say, to downtown Los Angeles for a basketball game, and you're living, all the way out in the Hollywood Hills or something, and you want to get there quickly and avoid the whole mess of traffic that's on the roads, just have a air taxi just literally drop you right in front of your front door and carry you right to the stadium. I mean, that just makes sense. Like, I think the air we're gonna have autonomous air taxis for sure.
You're not wrong. To me, I'm picturing someone who's, obscenely wealthy at the start of this whole transition, being able to afford that kind of thing. I've already been seeing that being used for health related issues, right? So air ambulances to be able to get people to hospitals faster, or like transport organs faster for surgery and things like that, where you really need either the specialist to kind of go with the patient and transport them to the hospital, or even the autonomous drones that, a thing comes down, you put the heart in it, the little thing goes up, and the drone flies off to the next hospital to kind of drop off the heart. These systems are using AI vision to kind of determine how they can avoid obstacles, how they can make sure that they're dropping their packages and people in the right spots, how they can deal with any kind of inclement weather and avoid those kinds of situations, or even kind of avoid other air taxi or air ambulance systems that exist. So I agree with you. We're heading in that direction. I think that once the energy density of batteries gets just a little bit higher, it'll start to be proliferating everywhere. It'll be this huge gold rush to figure out how we can have almost like a personal flying vehicle. And again, we're just waiting for that electrification of the industry. I think a lot of the other technology is probably already there.
Yeah, and to your point also with respect to cargo, there's a company in California called Nautilus, which is a cargo drone company basically. And they've got drones now that can carry up to 2,000-pound payloads and fit very reliably, totally unmanned. And it's a blended wing design. And so, I mean, like, yeah, to your point, yeah, cargo is another area where this self-driving autonomous future is just on the cusp. It's, again, you're still dealing with regulatory hurdles and trying to figure out, what happens if and how do we manage that. But that's absolutely coming, and it's just on the cusp. And we've heard of Amazon obviously doing drone deliveries and things of that nature. So again, it starts with those things and then eventually starts bleed into moving humans around this planet. So it's coming. It's been slow to arrive, but it feels like we're on the cusp.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered kind of planes, trains, and automobiles. So there's really only one other one that probably isn't talked about very often, and that's shipping on the sea. So at first, I think we're going to see that everywhere. There's Orca AI joins One Sea's autonomous shipping. So it's in Tel Aviv, Israel, and they're looking at really trying to figure out how to, both create transportation or like ships that can use these AI systems, as well as upgrade the ships that already exist to use these AI systems. The European Space Agency is looking at adding additional satellites or providing additional data to these shipping companies so that they can be even more precise in terms of GPS coordinates, so that they can avoid obstacles that much better and have much more data. I think that, again, as goes the shipping world, so goes the personal transportation world. I'll be super interested to see how long until we have, AI controlled cruise ships, and then again, personal watercraft that is completely automated. I would love a boat that I didn't have to worry about trying to steer and manage myself.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, there is a project I know called the Mayflower Autonomous Ship Project, which is developed by a nonprofit organization called ProMare, and their main partner is IBM. And they are working on a autonomous ship that can go transverse oceans completely, totally unmanned. And so this is definitely happening in the maritime industry. It's and like you said, as boats go, eventually we'll go the way of moving humans on the ocean as well. So it's definitely happening, and there's obviously big tech behind it and big data behind it. So again, it's you can just see this bleed out. It is touching absolutely everything, and that's kind of why we did an episode about transportation, because it's easy to overlook, right? It's easy to kind of just like focus on things like productivity, and we're going to get into things like education and arts and et cetera. But like here, transportation is over $10 trillion industry, right? And AI is gonna completely disrupt the industry in absolutely every tentacle that exists. So
and
we needed
and
to
I
do
think
this episode
public,
because
yeah, I was going to say, I think the public in general, and even myself, we always focus on cars, right? Or
yeah,
transport trucks.
mm-hmm.
And I wanted to make sure, and I know that you did too, to highlight the fact that this is in every type of transportation that exists.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
everything that can move, everything that's a vehicle will have some kind of AI system plugged into it in some way, shape, or form. And some of these will actually probably come faster than personal vehicles and is already happening faster than personal vehicles. And I think that's a very important distinction that the media typically doesn't cover.
yeah. And we didn't even talk about space, right? But like, of course, the space programs have been, heavily using AI and deep learning, machine learning, and big data sets in order to fly rockets. SpaceX, of course, with its Falcon rocket program, heavily using AI, of course, and then even just Blue Origin, for example. Jeff Bezos's space tourism company, right? They're also working on unmanned missions where they'll take space tourists up in the sky and working on autonomous systems in order to do that reliably and safely and as cheap as possible to make it affordable for people to do. So even the space program is going to go the way of complete autonomous and self-flying. So it's touching everything, like we said. You're
I really
pondering.
hope I get to.
You're looking up at the sky, and you're pondering whether Malcolm Peralty will go to the moon someday, or
Well, at
orbit
least up to
anyway.
space. Yeah,
Yeah,
I want to
yeah,
go up to space. My wife is very anti that. She really doesn't like that idea. She doesn't want me to go. She doesn't want to go herself.
right.
But I
Uh huh.
think that, the cost of these things will continue to drop as we use these tools that are super effective at really understanding these complex problems in a way that we as humans just never could. And I am hesitant to talk about the fact that there will be job losses in all of these industries that we've talked about today, right? As we talked about, AI
Of course.
trucking, job losses, taxis, job losses,
Yeah.
all of these will have or experience some kind of job losses. But I look forward to a lot of these things being more accessible in hopes. Like, I hope that it will be more accessible. I would love to go up into space.
Same. I would love to get that vantage point just once in my life. I have a feeling I'm going to miss. I have a feeling in my 50s already. I don't know. I think maybe it's something for my sons someday to experience, but we'll have to see. Hopefully the costs come down fast enough that it becomes something that I could consider. But definitely an ambition. I would definitely love to go up in space someday for sure. But and you mentioned job losses, so I it's a real tough one, and I know we've touched on it. We touched on it in our productivity episode. It's going to keep coming up. This
Yeah.
notion of AI replacing humans, and what happens, and where does this human productivity go, and how do we deal with that in society? And we'll get into that in a future episode with AI and employment. I think is a future episode for us. But I mean, just I mean, when you think about transportation, it kind of covers off everything from white collar to blue collar. Like it hits every type of worker, right? I don't know what happens to the humans that get replaced amongst all the cross section of jobs that we would lose in this sector. It's significant, and again, this is going to be something that's going to continuously pop up, and I think we're going to have to grapple with as a society. This is a big one. It's a huge issue.
Yeah, and I think one of the takeaways for anyone that's listening to this is we're not talking decades. A lot of the things that we've covered
Mm,
today are not these future ideas of some futurists on the internet. We were talking about things today that are happening
years.
now.
Yeah.
Like the automation of all of these things is very few years away, and we as a society have to figure out what that looks like. And I think the goal of futurists today really should be trying to figure out what does all this human potential get pointed towards as AI kind of spins up.
100%. And You're right. Things are moving very, very quickly, and we're going to have to deal with these big issues much faster than we probably thought we would have to deal with. So, anyway, these episodes are coming fast and furious. This brings us to the end of our AI and transportation episode. We hope you enjoyed diving into and unpacking all the different areas of transportation that AI is going to stretch its tentacles into and change probably forever. Thank you so much for listening, and definitely please subscribe if you don't want to miss our next episode. We are super grateful for your time and for listening to AI Unpacked. Thank you for joining us. We will catch you in the next episode. All the best.